That's really what the car's message is. It's just fun. What's easier to sell than that? I don't have no. I had no idea what I was doing when I did all this. It was more of a kind of a cuckoo guy doing his usual cuckoo thing. I wasn't in line with taking good care of all the rules. Rule breaking was part of the fun. I think that's something that all of us, whether we realize it or not, we're born into a world of the great no-no. And everything we do in life is steered by rules. I mean, the color of those curbs, there's yellow ones and green ones and red ones and white ones, blue ones. They all mean something different. And we learn what that is. So we live by this. And that car kind of thumbed its nose at the world. It thumbed its nose at the traditions of car design. Had I been a car designer, there would not be a Meyers Manx Dune buggy. Being ignorant of something is also very helpful. Ignorant of the rules of car design. But I knew a lot about mechanical things and sailboats, which I had been making fiberglass sailboats as the guy working in a large company doing that. But so I used that kind of information to make the fiberglass car. The other thing was I spent many, many years in art schools. I studied fine art. When you go to art school, they first ask you what kind of an artist you want to be. Is there more than one? Yeah, there's commercial art and there's fine art. But as it turns out, to be a commercial artist, you better learn something about fine art to make yourself a better commercial artist. I got all wrapped up in that. I never did go to the commercial side. I stayed in the fine art side. But I used to draw a lot. Figures, people, faces, portraiture and figure drawing were my big love. I wound up teaching that. I became a very proficient draftsman of the human body. Drawing the figure is something that you must imbue, I hope, with some gesture, sense of movement, sense of life. Maybe I brought some of that to the Dune buggy. It has a little look of wanting to hiccup or jump ahead or something. So that sense of movement or sense of fun, which it seems to have, is the big push. Is that the biggest reason for, I think it's continuing to grow? We've, over the years, that was 50 years ago. Over the years, I went away from it because I was very angry because everybody stole the thing and went around the world. There's some 250,000 dune buggies around the world, estimated. There's hundreds and hundreds of companies that made them for a little while, maybe a few days, maybe a week or two. Maybe, I hope, they fed their children. But if there's anything good to say about people that copy you, you got to look for it. But Winnie and I have been all over the world. We've been to Europe and Australia, and we find other kinds of iterations of the Meyers Manx in all those places. And that's been going on for 50 years. So there's a lot of dune buggies in the world, which more or less imitate the Meyers Manx. I once led a parade around the Le Mans racetrack in France of 1,100 Volkswagens. The first 200 or 300 were all dune buggies. I was driving a real Meyers Manx leading them, but not another one of those other buggies looked like the Manx except in some ways. But the idea, I suppose another thing was everybody gets to be a car designer when you make a fiberglass body for a little Volkswagen chassis. It's kind of like putting your name up in lights or something, probably about their ego more than anything. And unfortunately, most car designers aren't very talented, but they had a lot of fun in their efforts. Can my wife talk? She talks all the time.
I just want to introduce Bruce. He's the inventor of the fiberglass dune buggy, and he was here to speak today about what the Meyers Manx has created in the world by being out there. But we always first had a question, and he was starting to answer the question, but he got way off track. And the question was, why did you stop making the floor pan model Meyers Manx? And in a nutshell, I'll give you the answer, and then he can continue. How's that? The answer is that in 1999, we went back into business creating the Meyers Manx. Instead of, when Bruce was doing it initially, it was B.F. Meyers and Company, and then it went down in 1971. And so in 1999, we came together and decided to bring it back. And so he recreated the old classic style, the one you're talking about, the floor pan model, in 99. And in 99 and 2000, we sold a limited edition signature series of 100. People call them Siggies today. And the signature series, like I said, was only 100, and we promised that we would never do that model again. And so that brought the value of those 100 cars way up. And people today still think that the find is important, and so they still go after the old one, and that's brought the value of the old ones up. But we now have 4 new models, which are much, much better. So I'm going to turn this over to Bruce now, and he's going to tell you some of the things that the Meyers Manx started in our culture.
Well, it started lawsuits. That's not a nice thing to say. That's the one I lost. You know, there was a guy that ran around the United States snuffing out little Volkswagen repair shops because they painted their building white with blue trim like the Volkswagen colors, or they used the word VW or the emblem. And that very same lawyer was the very same lawyer that I had hired to protect me from the guy that copied, the first guy that I took on that copied the Manx. And we lost. As it turns out, I learned out he had never been in a courtroom before. But that was a long time ago. I know, but we're going to be talking about what the good things are. You know what the good things are? The men that have walked up to me and shook my hand and said, I want to thank you for keeping my son out of trouble. I saw him smoking some grass. I could smell it in the bedroom. He's got a picture of a dune buggy. Look at the bitchin' dune buggy, Dad. And Dad saw an opportunity to run down and buy a kit, an old Volkswagen, and spend the next 6 or 8 months bonding with his son. I've had many, many of those men walk up to me and show me those things. Often the man is now 45 years old and Dad is dead, and that's the dune buggy. The dune buggy is much loved. What?
And now his son is building a new buggy with him.
Well, in 1999, was it, when we started to go back to the Manx, we also started to build a club. And we chased down people. We'd see a Volkswagen tied behind, or rather a buggy behind some guy's camper going down the highway. We'd roar back and chase him down and either put a card under his windshield wiper or his horn button and say, come and join our club. The first club gathering was 12 cars. And every time we had a gathering, it was a larger number, and larger and larger. Today, the club has got close to 5,000 members, the very first internationally. Last year at the Big Bear Run, there was a gathering for the 50th anniversary of the Manx. There was 303 cars that signed up. There was another 100, I don't know where they came from. They're all over the place. But there was some 400 or 500 dune buggies all over Big Bear. It's a little resort town outside of L.A., up in the mountains, a lot of snow. At any rate, today, when we have a club gathering, it's not unusual to have 150 or 200 dune buggies at the gathering. I am surrounded by love. And what?
Tell them that there are... Well, I was just going to prompt him to say that they're in the club. They are not all Meyers Manxes, because the Meyers Manxes started what we call the Sons of Manx.
No, we don't. It doesn't have to be a Meyers Manx. Unfortunately, the word Manx Club probably implies that you have to have a Meyers Manx. You don't. You just have to have a street legal dune buggy. I don't care if it's made out of plywood. In fact, there's a dune buggy in Baja that's steel frame, but it's covered with cardboard. We don't care. It's just as long as it has to be street legal. And boy, there's some ugly ones, but there's the people that love them turn to me as the Messiah or something, and I never knew what I was doing when I did all this.
So what did it start, the Meyers Manx? It started the kit car business, basically?
Started the kit car business, but the kit car business is made of people that copy. The Manx is not a copy; it's an original. So it's the only original in the kit car world. Though the Manx isn't what looks like a race car. It had a wonderful racing record. It has an unbelievable racing record. Of course, that's the only reason is because it's, I had a dog once. He was a big dog. He was a Chesapeake Retriever, and we loved to chase jackrabbits. Boy, his name was Boy, could overtake a jackrabbit. He was that fast, but he could never catch him because the jackrabbit would change course. The jackrabbit darts to the left or the right, and because he hasn't got any weight. Well, the inertia of Boy crashed him and burned him. He wound up in the grandstands every time. He never caught a jackrabbit, but he could catch them up to them, but the jackrabbit would dart. That's what a Manx was all about in racing. In slalom racing, it raced for 3 years in a row. It won some 20 races once without ever losing to anybody. Another time, it went for 3.5 years. Top time of the day. This is over Chevrolets, Corvettes, Cobras, Maseratis, Lamborghinis, whatever. The whole thing was because it was like the jackrabbit. The car was in slalom racing or that kind of racing. Everything's really fast up to about 90 miles an hour. And then from that point on, the dune buggy is not so good. But it doesn't have to be because it's just slalom racing. When you're on a parking lot and you're zipping around, this wonderful, wonderful driver, Don Wilcox, was a very accurate driver. At the end of the day, they had a thing called fun runs. And Ted Trevor, who owned the car, said, anybody want to drive our car? And he will drive your car. And he's never been in your car before, but he'll make it go faster than you can. And he did, and they never lost a bet. And Don Wilcox is a genius. He's a great driver. He's an old man. I tried to get him to come here, but that's okay. The beginning of off-road racing was started by myself. There was a time, yes, that when before off-road racing as we know it, there was only a time of elapsed time records. Hello. Yeah, I know. The elapsed time records were you two guys go race those two guys on your motorcycles the length of Baja, and you set a record. It's a elapsed time record, ET record, and you'd get it in a magazine. You'd have the Mexican Council verify that it was legal on a big piece of paper, all in Spanish, and maybe a couple of magazines wrote about it, and then it was forgotten. So it was pretty much unknown. A period of 4 years, there was several records set by the motorcyclists. The greatest motorcyclists of that time were the Eakins brothers, who worked in the movies, jumping fences and so forth. And they were wonderful bike riders, and they went down the length of Baja and set a record of, I think, close to 40 hours, 39 hours and 48 minutes or something. I was at a party up in Big Bear in the snow with a lot of dune buggy guys, and I was invited to another party by Joe Parkhurst, who was the publisher of Parkhurst magazines, which the Cycle World magazine. He said, why don't you bring your buggy guys over here and we'll get together with the motorcycle guys. Well, that was a lot of fun because we all BS'd each other. Oh, hey, a bike can't beat a buggy if you really get serious about it. And they all laughed it off. I never really believed it either. But my friend Ted Mangles, who was at the party, he says the following day he comes to my office and he says, you want to beat those bikes? I said, I don't see how you can. He says, wait a minute. So he gets out the map We crawled around on the floor, and he says, we knew a lot about Baja. We'd been going there, exploring it for a period of 3 or 4 years. He said, put down times from point to point, average speed times. And I put down what I thought was reasonable. It got clear to the other end, and it only took us about 30 hours to go from the length of Baja. The motorcycle record was 40 hours. We beat them by 10 hours, just guesstimates. So it made it seem possible. And then, of course, you have to have enough mileage. There's no gasoline in Baja in those days. There was one at each end, but there was 750 miles of nothing, of just dirt trails, beaches, mountains, and so forth. And so we carried the gas on board by putting 3 oxygen bottles, one on either side and across the front. And then we carried all this gas inside in jugs. We had jugs between our knees. And that's the way we set the first record to beat the bikes.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but that is a whole nother seminar about off-road racing. So what you found is that Meyers Manx started off-road racing.
Anyway, I'm telling you how it all started.
Don't tell him now.
My Winnie doesn't want me to cheat. Anyway, we set the first record to beat the motorcycles by over 5 hours. We had a lot of breakdowns and problems, but we still beat them easily. That was advertised by Road and Track magazine, which went around the world to 120 or 30 motoring journalists, and the phones rang off the hook. The first organization was put together. I was a helper of that. I didn't want to be the head of it. And we took off with off-road racing, from which the first race had 68 cars, and about 45 of them were all Volkswagen based. And somebody came to me and said, you're close to Volkswagen, why don't you see if we can't get some money for the pot? Write a letter to VW of America, and I did, and it came back with a lawsuit. They're going to sue me if I in any way allied them to racing with a racing image. That's Volkswagen for you. They're really sue-happy people, but anyway, we never got any help. And so off-road racing was started. That's what Meyers Manx brought to the world.
Meyers Manx also brought something else, and that was the upholstery top.
Oh, my God. You mean the flower tops and seats? That was just patio furniture, upholstery. But it was another part of that spunky, fun look, and people responded to it. The car is so fun looking. It's fun to drive. You cannot drive any kind of a buggy without getting the people on the street waving at you or tooting their horns or thumbs ups. It just drive went around for a while. You can't believe the response from the passerbys. What?
See if there are any questions.
Say it again.
Are there any questions?
She's asking you, is there any questions? Anyway, the Manx is as big a surprise to me as it is to anybody. All these things that have developed over 50 years, of course, changed my life. I find myself with an awful lot of. I'm a shy guy by nature, I guess, and it makes me feel a little silly to be sitting here telling you all these things. But yes, go ahead.
How did you come up with the first shape?
Well, the first shape probably was, and I have to examine myself about that. I spent many years studying fine art. I draw very well. I used to teach figure drawing. Figure drawing has to have a sense of movement, gesture, to be successful, and portraiture. And I did all that stuff for many years. When I worked in the boat company building the tooling for fiberglass sailboats, I learned the technique. Now, I was also surrounded by a crazy bunch of people. They're called abalone divers. The abalone processing world was right in the heart of where I lived in Newport Beach. The abalone divers themselves were guys that came down out of the hills. They were ski bums, and they came down to make money during the spring and summer, making money diving under the water to get the abalone for the abalone business. It was just a way of being surrounded by people that ignored rules and having a sense of freedom nobody likes to be guided by too many rules. I suppose down deep we all enjoy anybody that breaks a little bit of a rule, but the dune buggy kind of looks at the whole business of rules in fact, if I knew anything about designing cars, I wouldn't have designed the dune buggy.
You're not answering the question. The shape.
The shape came from a resistance to rules. Maybe that's who I was. I was 38 years old. Funny how when you're 38 years old, you think in terms of the young person. I never thought it would last so long that I got so old that I couldn't climb in and out of one. I mean, all my friends came in the shop and they said, well, how high are the sides going to be? I said, well, there's a stick with a pair of clamps. Go ahead and clamp it up where you think it ought to be. And what you see today is the result of that. It was about where it's high enough to make you feel comfortable. It's not so high it's hard to climb in and out of. It's at least when you're 38 years old. And all of that came to pass as being too high for an old guy like me. And so none of us were very old, I suppose. When we made that judgment about the height of the side, I had them clamp it and put their initials on it. After a couple, 3 weeks, I said that must be the happiest place, and that's what it is. It's just high enough to swing your legs in and out, climb in and out, get in and out, and be protected somewhat. But
I think you were also inspired by the fender shape of these, not the Kubel, but the other one.
oh, the Schwimmwagen. Well, there's a tiny detail in the Schwimmwagen where the body drops down from the higher level over the rear axle and drops down to the waist of the car. There's a little hook, a little shape that I just liked. It touched me. It was very beautiful. And I think that was a part of that's the sort of thing, when you study artists, they always went through periods, and they were affected by the other artists that were around them or the other art world. And I suppose I was affected by things like the Kubel's little dip in the side. That's the only part of it, just a little tiny detail.
I think one of the other places was inside the car, what we call your DNA.
Well, when you make a plug being the imitation of what it is you're going to make a mold of, I had the sides made out of plywood. The fenders were made out of foam and Bondo and fiberglass. There was still a pair of back wheels peeking at me through the inside of the car. The rear wheels needed some sort of an interior fender shape. Outside the door was a pickup truck from a friend, an abalone diver. And I said, the front corner of your hood on your Ford, it was a 5456 pickup truck, but the corner of the front hood was about the shape I could use. Let me use your truck. And he throws me the keys. Sure, go ahead. And I never drove it. All I did was grease the front end and put some plaster on it, lift the plaster off, clean his truck up for him. And from that little plaster mold, I made a little plug, which was the shape of the front corner of a Ford pickup truck, which is the rear fender wells over the rear interior. That when you look in the books about dune buggies, you look inside and there it is. I call that my DNA. It's that little shape that came from a Ford pickup truck.
And that's because all the copies have that very same shape.
Well, that they had to use the Manx to get started. They changed the fenders, they changed the hood, they put bumps here and there, they changed the shape on the side, but the fender well is still there, which proves that they lifted a mold from the interior of the Manx. It's not important to me. It used to piss me off, but you know what about anger? It's all yours. You can't share it. And if you keep it, all you do is hurt you. Nobody else is going to care. I had to learn that a long time. 21 years I was ticked. I didn't want to hear the word dune buggy. I didn't want to see them. I stayed away. I did other things with myself. But the business of the copier was, I guess, just a hunk of human nature. If there's anything good about it, I hope he fed his kids well on copying what I created. So that's okay. Just don't. Yes.
So what was your turning point? At what point did you say, enough is enough, I'm not going to be mad anymore, I'm going to embrace the Meyers Manx and what I've done? Like, what made you kind of have the 180 moment?
Good question. We had been invited to France, Winnie and I, by Jackie Morrell, who was the publisher of the magazine Super VW. And we got over there, and I led this parade around the Le Mans racetrack of 1,100 Volkswagens. The first 300 or 400 were Dune buggies. I'm driving a real Manx. All these others behind me are iterations of the Manx. Most of them had my DNA, that interior fender well. But at the end of which, my host, Jackie Morrell, said, "You've got to change focus. You're focused on all those people that screwed you over. You've got to stop doing that because all you do is hurt yourself. You must remember that you brought pleasure to people." He said, in the Japanese culture, there's a saying that's, in all things can be found something beautiful. He said, those dune buggies have two people in them. They have smiling faces. Don't think about the car, just think of the smiling faces. And of course, in the downfall of Meyers Manx, I went through a process of trying to save my company. I had a lot of people working, and I had a trucking fleet and a lot of dealers. But when it all went away because the copiers were just cutting us up bad, I started getting very inventive, and I invented the fiberglass hot tub spa. There were spas on swimming pools made out of concrete. They're also made with wooden tubs, but all that water under the seat had to be heated. And I said that could be better as a fiberglass. So I created the fiberglass spa. I did another thing called the pickup truck bed liner. That's a vacuum-formed piece of plastic to improve the interior of the bed liner of the truck. And the other thing was a little race car called the Night Racer. It was a copy of a McLaren sports car. It was a bed for boys 12, 14 years old. All that stuff I created, and they were all picked up by other people, other companies. You see, I had a patent on the Manx, but the patent was found to be no good by the court, the judge, and the very clever lawyer on the other side. And I at that point thought about patents as being worthless because they kept my money. They never sent me the money back. When you lose your patent, you don't get anything back for it. All you do is lose. So the car was patented. I spent a lot of time pissing and moaning about the whole thing for many years. And when I got to France, and he said, change focus, do certain things, go home and do this, start a club, start a dune buggy club, build a new Manx of the 90s, which is the Manxter, the four-place car, and write a book. Well, the book is about halfway done. The Manxter is built, the club is way up, almost 5,000 members. And the best thing he told me was to change focus. Because when I did that, he says, you're going to have to pretend. You have a frown on your face. Frowns chase people away. Frowns are negative. Nobody wants to be around a guy that frowns because he's making himself lonely. And he's going to get more and more ticked. The farther he goes down with his frown, the worse things get. He says, with a smile, he'll attract people. You may have to pretend, and I did. I pretended, and you know what? It works. Don't hang on to your anger. Nobody else cares about your anger except you. It's self-destructive. It's like eating lye. Forget your anger. He said there's the canary. The canary's in his cage. He's covered up. He's quiet. You uncover the canary, he starts singing to the sunshine coming through the window. Meanwhile, on the bird's cage floor is yesterday's newspaper. While he's singing, he's crapping on that yesterday's newspaper. That's what you must do. Just forget yesterday. It doesn't do a thing. For all of us here, we can't change the moment we decide to sit down. So the moments past are dead, and the moment ahead is for us to make the most of it. I think Jackie did the best thing for me. He changed my life. I went home and all those things took place. What it created was a sensation that went around the world, but it really recreated Bruce Meyers, because I died for 21 years. I didn't want to hear the word dune buggy. I was down in Mexico building a house. I restored a Rolls Royce limousine. I did all kinds of crazy stuff using my hands. And I like that. I like working with my hands. I don't ever think in terms of retirement. But anyway, I was away from it for a long time. And when I came back, because of this club, and Jackie Morrell telling me to go home and start all these things and change focus, that's the whole turnaround of my life. Because I would have gone to shoot myself. You know, there's a lot of people that jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco, like 200 or more. About 6 of them lived through it. And the moment they left the railing, they realized there was another answer. They had a chance to live again. They realized that there's better ways than to go on, you know, trying to kill yourself. So those lessons are makes me a happy guy. Every time I go to a club gathering, there's more and more dune buggies, and everybody in the world wants to come up close to me and have me sign things and so forth. And that's great. It makes me feel good. I like doing it for them, and I know I'm surrounded by love. Thank you.
Thank you very much.